Earth, come in. Are you there? This is the Perseverance. We landed. The rover's intact. It's functioning properly, but our antenna is having a little difficulties. Diving right in, we can see that the organic compound, it's a bold word, which means that it's a key term. You need to know what an organic compound is. It means that it contains hydrogen and carbon. Right there in this picture. There's carbon in the center, and it has 4 hydrogens around it. How many covalent bonds can carbon form? Count up the number of bonds that it has. Count up the number of atoms attached to it, and you can see that it's 4. My transmission from Mars is coming in and out, but I think it will hang in there for us. Take a look at the picture up above, and it's shaded where the carbons are. There's always 4 lines going to carbon, and carbon can bond to itself in what are known as skeletons or chains and branches. It's also called like the backbone of these molecules. Carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and nucleic acids all have a carbon backbone. We are called carbon-based life forms because of this. And it's not as simple as shown in this picture because these chains can be thousands, tens of thousands of carbons long. These molecules are so ginormous, they're called macromolecules. And just like a train, it can be a mile long. These chains of carbon can be so long, but they're made out of building blocks, just like a train has individual boxcars that are linked together. That's how these large molecules are built. They're built by small components being added on, and we'll get to the details on that. So what do we see in this picture right here? We see something called isomers. If you look at the example shown right here, it has 4 carbons and 10 hydrogens, but so does this guy in a different arrangement. Keep in mind, these are 3-dimensional structures, and they're not just 2-dimensional flat on a page. So they have shape and dimension to it. The different arrangement of the atoms is called an isomer. So isomers have the same chemical formula, different physical way that they're put together, and they're going to have different chemical and physical properties because of their different shapes. Right in, we can see that the organic compound, it's a bold word, which means that it's a key term. You need to know what an organic compound is. It means that it contains hydrogen and carbon. Right there in this picture. There's carbon in the center, and it has 4 hydrogens around it. How many covalent bonds can carbon form? Count up the number of bonds that it has. Count up the number of atoms attached to it, and you can see that it's 4. My transmission from Mars is coming in and out, but I think it will hang in there for us. Take a look at the picture up above, and it's shaded where the carbons are. There's always 4 lines going to carbon, and carbon can bond to itself in what are known as skeletons or chains and branches. It's also called like the backbone of these molecules. Carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and nucleic acids all have a carbon backbone. We are called carbon-based life forms because of this. These molecules are so ginormous, they're called macromolecules. And just like a train, it can be a mile long. These chains of carbon can be so long, but they're made out of building blocks, just like a train has individual boxcars that are linked together. That's how these large molecules are built. They're built by small components being added on, and we'll get to the details on that. So what do we see in this picture right here? We see something called isomers. If you look at the example shown right here, it has 4 carbons and 10 hydrogens, but so does this guy in a different arrangement. Keep in mind, these are 3-dimensional structures, and they're not just 2-dimensional flat on a page. So they have shape and dimension to it. It's the same chemical, just like you see up here for butane and isobutane, but a different skeletal arrangement. It might be unbranched or branched. It could be in a ring structure. These isomers have the ability to have different effects. So now you understand what an isomer is. A hydrocarbon is a molecule that is made up of just these two things, hydrogen and carbon. So it's called a hydrocarbon. And a few changes in a molecule, usually on a piece that hangs off of the skeleton of carbon or the ring of carbon, then it becomes something completely different, but it was a small change. So these are called chemical groups, and they're key to how biological molecules function. And the example is testosterone or estrogen. They're very similar in their shape, but they have different chemical groups. You see the word hydrophilic, and we're going to talk about that word. It has parts of water in there, hydro. We know that that means water, and philic means lover. So sometimes molecules love to be next to water. Water, as you know, is polar. It has a slightly positive side where the hydrogens are, slightly negative side where the oxygen is. So it's a magnet. It will stick to other magnetically polar opposites. So the positive side of water sticks to the negative side of another neighboring molecule, could be water, or anything else that has a negative side to it. When you see oxygen as an N group, that is going to be polar. So this side is negative, this side is negative, it's going to have other positive things stick to it. So that's what a hydrophilic molecule is. It's itself polar like this, and it will stick to water on the opposing polar opposite. So here's a list of different chemical groups which are common ends stuck to these carbon skeletons. In your homework, you're going to write down the chemical symbol. I wouldn't ask you to memorize these, but just work through this list and recognize that they're common endings. You're going to take chemistry class as a future science class here at Mater Dei, and you will come to understand these in more detail in a chemistry class. But here in biology, you should know that they're part of the molecules that make up you, trees, insects, anything that is alive has the same biochemistry. They're made up of carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. And all of these are carbon-based, and they have these functional groups on there. So the first one, it's called a hydroxyl, and it'll have OH on it, very common ending. A carbonyl group is also very common, where it's double bonded carbon to oxygen. Carboxyl, COOH for atoms at the end of the molecule. Amino groups contain nitrogen, phosphate groups contain phosphate, and a methyl group is a fully saturated with hydrogen, as you can see right here, shaded in green. Very common functional groups, and they take on special functions for the carbon molecule that it is attached to. Here on the planet of Mars, we are looking for carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and nucleic acids, but we're also going to look for the components and the building blocks of these because those are macromolecules. And the analogy is a train being a large, long train, maybe a mile long. Well, these large molecules are built by small little box cars like a train. and you hook them together and you start making a long chain. Just like a train could be hundreds of cars long, a macromolecule may have thousands of carbons. And so if you're going to build a large molecule from small ones, then you have to put the building blocks, which are small little building pieces, together. Let's get some terminology out of the way. The large macromolecule is called a polymer, and they're built by little building blocks called monomers. Poly, many, mono, one. And you can see these come from the Greek words. And the meros, or mers at the end of monomer, that is called a part. So the building part, it is a monomer, and string a bunch of them together and you will have a polymer. So carbohydrates are a polymer. Proteins are a polymer. Nucleic acids are a polymer, and their building blocks are monomers, and we will get to the details on what they are for those particular macromolecules. But here on Mars, we're looking for monomers. Now, how this process works is clearly understood on Earth, and so we're going to see if it is very similar on Mars if we find life at all. So look at this picture right here, and you can see that we have a small molecule, and we're putting another building block, so it's like a small train, adding another boxcar. And in order to make them hook together, they have to be ready to bond together, these two sides. But right now they're happy because they've got like functional groups on the end of it, and they're not going to react. But if you take an OH off of one side and an H off the other, bring those together and you have water. So we have dehydrated water out of these two monomers to build one longer train car, one longer polymer. And it takes water out of it like that. So pretty cool. And now the opposite happens as well. If you just ate a meal of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, those are large molecules that have to be broken down into smaller ones called monomers. So here's your large molecule that you ate, and it's going to cut it somewhere along that carbon chain. Now you have a rough edge. You have a carbon that is missing some of its bonds. Remember, carbon is going to want to have 4 bonds to it. Now, if you cut that off, now it has 3 and it needs to bond to something else. Split water this time into its components of OH, patch that up on one side, and the remaining H patches up on the other side that you chopped up, and now it will have 4 bonds to it, all the carbons again. So in order to take a polymer down to monomers, it is called hydrolysis because you are splitting water to get at the components of water, OH and H. And these two reactions are really reverse of each other. They both involve water. One forms water as it pulls it out of the ends of a molecule so that the polymer can keep joining. Or in the other case, it needs to split water so that it takes components. After it splits the large polymer, it's got rough edges, missing pieces, and you take that out of water that you dismantled. That is what you see here in this video in your textbook. This is chapter 3, section 3, and watch this video. We'll talk about dehydration synthesis. It synthesizes a large polymer, that's synthesis, and hydrolysis is going to split a polymer into smaller monomers. So you'll get to understand it if you go through it. Now, on to the worksheet. Hello, Earth. This is a Perseverance, trying to persevere here on the surface of Mars. And before I lose my antenna, I want to give you this update on the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins here on the surface of Mars. Grab your reading guide and let's go. So why is this molecule an organic? Because it has carbon. We are a carbon-based life form. The 3 reasons that this is an ideal element from which to construct Carbohydrates, fats, proteins, these are complex molecules. 3 reasons. Number 1, carbon can form 4, get it, 4 covalent bonds. Take a look at that. There's always 4 lines that go around a carbon. It is missing 4 electrons. It needs to fill 4 electrons in its outermost electron, and that would be the valence shell, V-A-L-E-N-C-E. Carbon-based molecules can vary in the number of atoms. You can have 1, you can have 2, you can have thousands of carbons strung together. And then last, carbon can form covalent bonds with atoms other than hydrogen. Most of the time it's hydrogen, but it can also form bonds, covalent bonds with many different elements in the periodic table. Therefore, it is an ideal backbone molecule. What is meant by molecules carbon skeleton or backbone, and how can carbon skeletons vary? Well, the carbon skeleton refers to the number and arrangement of carbon atoms in a molecule. So you see all the examples right here? It can be in a straight line, it can be branched, it can be in a closed-in loop and a ring structure. And that is the backbone of carbs, fats, proteins, and we're looking for that here on the surface of Mars. Look at the molecules. The molecules would all be non-polar. Yep, these are non-polar because there is no oxygen next to it. But the answer to this question right here, the molecules would all be, they're just made out of hydrogen and carbon, so they're hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons, because carbon and hydrogen form non-polar covalent bonds. So I was supposed to use the word polar or non-polar, so the molecules would all be non-polar because carbon and hydrogen form non-polar covalent bonds. And these are all hydrocarbons as well, because there's only hydrogen and carbon. An unidentified molecule here on Mars is found in a sample of water. Hopefully we'll find water. Near a chemical plant. An initial analysis finds that the molecule contains only carbon and hydrogen. What type of molecule is this? There we go. This is a hydrocarbon because it has only carbon and hydrogen. Number 6, 2 molecules that have the same molecular formula but different structure would be referred to as an example right there. Butane and isobutane, 4 carbons, 10 hydrogens each, but they have different 3-dimensional structures. These are called isomers. That's the answer for number 6, isomer. Complete the table that you saw on page 42 in the textbook. The first one's done for you, hydroxyl, that is an OH. Carbonyl, go ahead and write in what you would have as the functional group on the end of the molecules. Those functional groups, by the way, they would go like on the end, instead of that hydrogen, it would be like a double bond to an oxygen or an OH like a hydroxyl. And the answer for 8, the only functional group that is non-polar is a methyl group, Number 9, molecules that are polar are called, and if they're polar, they're going to be polar like water. Water has a positive side where hydrogen is and a negative side where oxygen is on a water molecule. Therefore, it's magnetized. It can stick to other opposing charges on neighboring water molecules. But in this case, if you have molecules that are carbs, fats, proteins, that are polar themselves, they're going to stick to water and they're going to love water. That is called hydrophilic. Hydrophilic. If they were afraid of water, they would be called hydrophobic. But since they are water loving, they are attracted to the polar water molecules, and that means that they're soluble in water. This is necessary for life. We're 75% water, so everything has to be like mixed in with water. And so Polar molecules are soluble in water. That's the last fill-in right there. And now, the last few questions. We've talked about how these macromolecules are huge. They're like a big long train made up of tiny little boxcars. The boxcars are called monomers. So go ahead and write in why that is a good analogy, as we've discussed. Number 10 and 11 deal with this picture that you see in the far right-hand corner. These macromolecules are built by small little building blocks. In order to put them together, you have to take a water molecule out of it. So that is called dehydration synthesis. This is number 11. And you can check out the section 3 in chapter 3 for more help on that. Number 10, if you start with a large molecule, you have to break it up. And then if you chop a large molecule, you've got rough, incomplete edges. You're going to have to split water to get an OH on one side and an H on the other to patch it up so that carbon has its 4 required covalent bonds to it. That is called hydrolysis. There's a video in section 3 for you to watch as well, so go check that out. And then which of the following terms describes the reaction? Look at that. That glucose and galactose, those are monomers. You are going to put those together. So you're going to have to take a water out of those two combined in order for them to have a rough edge where they're needing to bond together. And then that is called dehydration reaction. Okay, this is an introduction to what we have for carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So it's been great to be here on the planet. I look forward to another transmission. This is the Perseverance signing off. Earth, yes, you're coming through. All right, I finished with my transmission and I'll send it to you now. Thank you. Yes, it will be submitted through Canvas. All right, I'll see you in a year. Everything's fine. I'll radio in tomorrow. For details about the Mars mission, go to mars.nasa.gov.